We have on the Baseball Happenings podcast artist Lauren Taylor, who's licensed with MLB Baseball Hall of Fame, softball player, enthusiast, big time baseball fan, yes, traumatic brain injury survivor, mental health advocate. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Lauren, so, I've seen a lot of your artwork. Why don't you start with telling the listeners how you got started in the field of art coming out of like playing ball in college?
Sure. There was a bit of a gap. It wasn't quite a smooth jump. I did a little bit of art starting in high school, and it wasn't necessarily sports related. It was kind of more of an outlet to kind of emote in a less vulnerable way. And it was, yeah, it's just something I kind of did for fun. And then I did end up going to Wenatchee Valley College on a softball scholarship, a partial scholarship, and was a awesome time. It taught me a lot, and it was kind of like, like college was great, but the lessons I learned playing college ball were ones that still kind of stick with me today, and it was great. And I ended up getting made it through 2 years of the junior college, and then moved on to Central Washington University, where unfortunately some of my injuries just caught up with me. And yeah, it was awesome, but I didn't do a lot of art during that period. And then I started to get back into playing, just kind of fun beer league softball, adult leagues and stuff as I got older, and found kind of some competitive leagues, and really kind of got back into playing at a more serious level. And that's when I got hit in the face with a line drive. Not a great experience, but that totally sidelined me. That was kind of the end of playing for me. And that's when I started kind of picking back up art and doing it in the form of kind of like telling stories of baseball history. And that's kind of how I refound my identity, because I kind of lost it as an athlete, and I was that's all I ever did was sports. So
Understood.
When I could no longer play, I started using art to kind of tap into that, and that's kind of when those worlds collided a bit.
Did you find the art therapeutic, in your process of recovering?
Yeah. For the longest time, I mostly did pencil work, which I still do, but it's almost like a meditation for me. I'm not great at regular meditation, but I can really zone in on when I'm doing, pencil work for hours and just kind of get lost in the art. And same with now when I create with mixed media on wood, I just kind of get lost in the process. And it's also been a way for me to express myself, but more importantly, even when it's just baseball and I'm not expressing something within me, it takes me out of my head, which is sometimes the best medicine for me, is just to get out of my own head. So,
and when you played, because you had said earlier about trying to put that side away, especially after the injury. I spoke with author Brad Baluchin early this year. Brad put out a wonderful book called The Wax Pack Book. And in it, he caught up with a lot of former major league players, well after their careers were retired. And a lot of them said that, they had trouble putting the player inside of them, to bed. And I think that's something all of us who had played collegiately kind of struggle with. As you said, like, I had to try to find, my identity. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I feel like a lot of people who played collegiately, after a time's up and it's like, oh, wait, my uniform's not waiting for me, or, the schedule's not set, is not the easiest transition for everyone to make.
No, it absolutely wasn't. I mean, from everything from how the heck do I make friends without being forced to hang out with, the same group of people, down to, like you said, not having my day outlined in terms of, workouts, school, practice, everything. The life of an athlete from when you start in, grade school or whatever, obviously it's not as intense then, but you kind of start this lifestyle of your free time is used to kind of build up this dream of making it to whatever level you can get to. And I think for me, realizing that I was at my ceiling at that point and there was no next step, was most devastating to me because I didn't know what to focus on anymore. It was like, I'm done. Like my whole life of trying to get better and see how far I could get. And for the longest time, it was about getting into college on a scholarship. And then from there, it was about, making my mark in that, in my tenure at that school. All of that goes away. And suddenly you're just, I remember my coach saying in practice a lot, she's like, in the real world, you are not going to have people cheer for you every time you complete an assignment at work. We always laugh like, yeah, whatever, I don't know what that means. But it's so accurate. You go from, that to suddenly you're at a desk job and you're not training for anything. You're not doing it. It just, I totally didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to meet people. I didn't know how to be a human outside of sports. And it took a lot of adjusting and it was difficult for sure.
And so would you say your artwork has kind of got you, quote unquote, back in the game because of the connections that you've been able to make, with the players and, the people, fans who are supporting you?
Yeah, it's bridged the gap for sure. And it's more of the thing I like about this is something that my body can get older and sore and joints cannot be as functional and all that stuff, and I still can make art. Whereas, before, there's a time, a certain age you get to where you're no longer, trending upwards. And I think the nice thing about combining art and sports for me is it seems like the more time I put into it, the better it gets. And the more I understand my capabilities and able to try new things. And, my goal with every art piece is to tell a story. So in order to be able to effectively tell a story, I need to know the material. So I'm always watching baseball. I'm always thinking about baseball. And it's made a huge difference for me because it's allowed me to still, work on my identity outside of sports, but also still really be in that community. That's such a special community to, I think, anyone that's been in sports knows that family feeling that just follows you wherever sport is.
It does. It's pervasive in many sports. And like you said, there is a family atmosphere that follows. When did the opportunity come to you to work in partnership with Major League Baseball and the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Yeah. Well, after the injury, there was probably about a year and a half to 2 years or so that I was just kind of working on sports art, and it wasn't that great. Like, it was nothing that stood out. And then I started transitioning over onto wood instead of canvas or paper, and then using different techniques like stencil and paint and ink. And that's when I started to kind of think, okay, I have something unique here. There's not a lot of this out there, and I kind of ran with that. And once I had something I was somewhat proud of, I decided to see, like, instead of being so nervous all the time of, like, what am I and what am I not allowed to do in terms of using logos and, okay, you can do an original, but you can't do prints. I reached out to the MLBPA, and they kind of told me what needs to be done, and they put me in contact with first some baseball card companies like Topps and Panini. Unfortunately, they weren't interested, which is fine. It actually was the best thing because it forced me to get better. And then I ended up working with Legendary Sports Print, so Art of Words is kind of what they go by, and that's how that kind of fell into place. And then the Hall of Fame came later, so this is the first year I've been doing Hall of Fame prints. So I think a little bit of luck, a lot of hard work, and the right timing is really kind of how it came about. And
you mentioned the Hall of Fame. I was listening to Matt's podcast, Pretty Big News, with him and Blake, and you were on there.
Yeah.
And you discussed, like, you have a certain amount of Hall of Famers that, like, you're allowed to work with because of certain licensing thing. Are any of the Negro Leagues players in that group of players that you can eventually use as subjects?
I need to check. I know there's a separate licensing agreement for some of the Negro Leagues logos and all that stuff, so which I don't have
Hmm.
licensing rights to, but I'm kind of learning as I go all the different. There's a lot of little things like that that you know there's an additional license needed. So if nothing else, like I can do one-of-one originals if anything I want. So usually when I'm like I did a Hank Aaron recently where
Hmm.
I try to tie in his time with the Clowns, Indianapolis Clowns, so that people then are like, what is that in his jersey, and it kind of encourages them to look it up and see that that's where he started. And with one-of-ones I can do anything I want. It's just with prints that you have to start kind of you know that's when you have to kind of pay attention to licensing and all that stuff. So
Sure. Understood. Is there a favorite player per se that either you've had the opportunity to work with or, you know, illustrate that like you've stepped back and looking at it like this really holds a special place for me because?
yeah, I get asked this every interview, I think, and I still have yet to have like a very quick, smooth answer because it's always changing.
Hmm.
There will never be a more special moment, I think, than when I got to spend about 45 minutes with Willie Mays just talking baseball by myself with him, and it was an incredibly special time that I don't think I'll ever forget, and I don't know that I'll ever top that. But that was special for its own reason. With other players, things have stuck out to me, like Tony Kemp and Mike Yastrzemski, and Jackie Bradley Jr., Robinson Cano, people like that have gone out of their way to be so kind and so helpful, and not just, complimenting my art, but also helping me reach other players and make more connections. And they're just, there have been people throughout this that have stuck out to me in that sense. And then, of course, there's just athletes that are, such big stars that you kind of are, like Albert Pujols, for example. I was kind of like, I don't often have a loss of words, but I was kind of confused what to say. I just was like, yeah, like, sometimes you just are in front of someone that you watch on TV and you see all these milestones that they've achieved, and you're face to face and you realize they're just a person, but at the same time, there's so much more to so many people. So I always say there's a few different levels of that. There's the special moments because, like, Willie Mays will forever be my first baseball card. He's a piece of history. And then there's people like Tony Kemp and Jackie Bradley Jr. who reminded me that baseball players are human and they have their own story and they're kind and they have families and they want to help and they're more than athletes. So I don't know if that makes sense, but there's a lot of different meetups that have been special for different reasons.
Sure. It definitely does
I've
make
yet
sense.
to make that answer easy for anyone. So
I can
if I ever
appreciate the
have an
Mays
easy
thing.
answer.
Because like
Yeah.
Mays holds such a special place in the game. You mentioned Pujols actually just passed Mays, which like I was like, wow, I forgot that he was
Yeah.
that close. And Mays
Yeah.
is usually pretty guarded. I met Mays maybe about 10 years ago, and it was brief, like an appearance here in New York, and everyone wants a piece with him. And to
Yeah.
be able to get him like one-on-one for that amount of time really does sound like a special thing because not everyone's had that level of access to someone like Willie Mays, especially at this stage of his, of the game for him.
And I think that's why it was special, is because it was going so sideways for the first 5 minutes. Like, I was having a moment like, oh my God, don't meet your heroes. Like, it's like nothing I was saying was smooth and it was awkward. And I was like, he's going to leave any minute now. Like, what am I doing? And there was actually kind of a funny moment I can laugh at now, but at the time I was like sweating bullets. But I turned and looked at the clubhouse manager who was in the room with us at the time, and he said, Willie Mays said to me, "What are you looking at him for?" And I was so nervous because I felt like I was saying the wrong things, and I finally just looked at Willie Mays and I said, "Listen, I am so nervous right now." Like, I just was very honest. I'm like, if you would ask 10-year-old me if I'd ever be meeting you, I would have blacked out. Like, I don't know what to say. I just kind of, and it just broke this kind of awkwardness that was with us for that first 5 minutes where I was like, I'm irritating this guy. Like, I'm not saying the right things. And I'm so glad I was honest with him about how nervous I was, because it suddenly just changed the dynamic. And I just had a conversation with him, and it just changed. I started asking him about, plays that were special to me, and what he remembers most about, things like the over-the-shoulder catch that everybody knows about. And what he remembers about it is actually not the same thing you would think. Like, he talks about how he was ready. He was thinking the whole time that he needed to get the ball in right away, because otherwise the catch wasn't going to be that special because there was a runner, and I think once I broke down and just was human with him, he was a human back to me.
Yep.
And it started to get more comfortable. But that is why that was so special, is because there was 5 minutes there where I was like, this guy's going to walk out. Like, I have ruined this. So, yeah. So glad that ended up okay.
Yeah, I've heard stories about Mays when I was younger, and he was doing the whole card show circuit. He was not easy to deal with, and I'm glad that did work out well for you. And like you said, adding a human element kind of maybe brought people, down off the guard that they have.
Yeah, and he was so sweet. Once that was done, like, wanted to make sure when he got a tee that I got a tee as well. And he was he was fun. He was really nice. And once that, once we were both, and I think that's the problem, is so much these athletes are treated like they're something other than human when they are just humans. And sometimes, I try and think of it like there are days when I have my headphones on when I'm walking down the street and I don't really want to talk. Yet I don't have the burden of every single person knowing who I am and wanting a piece of my time. And I try and keep that in mind now as I approach athletes. Like, if they're having a conversation, don't interrupt just because you know who they are. I've tried to learn a little bit more about the fact that, they are just humans and they are just doing the best they can most days. And yeah, that's been kind of a learning experience for me as well.
Understood. I was listening against you talk the other day, and something else came up, and I thought it's a good parallel about how, you seem really intense about playing, and as someone who also played in college, like, I really could appreciate that, and I was like, I gotta get to talk to her because, like, the wavelength is similar when you talked about, like, the approach to playing and the training and the, just really being competitive. How have you taken that approach over to your business? Because you had alluded to that as well in the interview of just like, hey, being like a sole proprietor, like everything kind of starts and ends with me. How have you taken those sport lessons and applied them to not the art, but the business?
Yeah, and that's, I get asked all the time, like, how do you get your art to, that's a question I get from a lot of young kids or whatever. How do you get your art in front of so-and-so? Or how do I show so-and-so my art? And, I try and be very honest with them that it's not you can be the most talented artist, but you have to be an entrepreneur at the same time, or you're just going to be a great artist that people don't know about. And, I don't label myself an artist as much as I label myself kind of an entrepreneur. And what that meant for me was being okay with failing all the time and being rejected all the time. If you knew how many emails and times I've reached out in the last 4 years and not had a response from a player, from an agent, from a team, you might think, okay, maybe it's time to like walk away, but really it's just being relentless until they finally start to learn your name and you finally get your foot in the door, and then you can show them what you're capable of. And that competitiveness of like, I don't want to give up until I get to a certain level. And then once I get to that level, it's still not enough, and I raise the bar higher. Sometimes it's exhausting, but it's also, I think, the reason I've been able to get to where I'm at in 3 years of doing this, actually committing to it being my business. And yeah, it's definitely all competition in my mind. Everything's a competition. Like, if I'm walking on the sidewalk and someone's next to me and they're walking a little bit faster than me, I got to speed up. I know that you don't know we're racing, but we're racing now. Like, so everything is a competition in my mind, which is, my work ethic comes from both my parents, who owned a restaurant for most of my life, and I watched their work ethic is second to none. I owe all that to them. And the other part is my coach in college. Just anything less than 110% was not good enough. And I used to curse her in my mind when I'd be running laps for like not taking the first step towards the ball that was nowhere near me. But now I understand it, and those lessons have kind of really, I think, helped this business be a business. Otherwise, I was just always going to be an artist that made things for friends and still worked at a desk job and didn't feel passionate about my job, if that makes sense. So
you bring up an excellent point because I was in the music business for a long time, and I saw a lot of that. Like artists just wanted to be artists, but when you're like an independent musician or an artist in the sense of like illustrations, photography,
yep.
there were a lot of people out there was like they're dope. They can really
There's
rap,
people that are way better than me out there,
but
and I know
can't
that.
handle the other part of it or expecting like I just need a good manager because they're maybe not
Yes.
willing to do that. And look, a good manager is worth that whatever 5-10%, but they're really hard to find. But at the end of the day, like a lot of people I felt were like waiting for somebody to put them on, or like what you said, maybe weren't like
Yeah.
confident. And after that first, second, or third, where Jacqueline was like, you know what, I don't want to deal with this, and I'm just gonna keep doing it for myself.
Yeah, I'm still not confident in myself, and I think that helps sometimes. I'm my own worst critic all the time, and that's helpful. It's also mentally draining sometimes, but I actually thought the same thing for a while. Like, I had it put in my head that, someone had mentioned they wanted to help me and kind of be like an agent in a way. And I'm like, an agent? Sweet. Like, isn't that what, like, famous people get? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, go find me some jobs. Like, I was like, this sounds perfect. And then I realized after a few times of like conversations that no one was going to love my product and sell my product better than me. And my ambition was always greater than these people I talked to about possibly representing me.
Yes.
And that's the difference, is no one else is ever going to be as passionate about my business succeeding as me. So I stopped looking for that. And now I'm the person that emails all the time and is looking for leads and is selling my product and is putting myself out there on social media. And, I've got friends and stuff all the time. They're like, you need to take a break from your phone. It's like, not right now. Like, I'm building my business and being on my phone and being responsive to social media and, constantly making sure my name is out there is the foundation I'm building right now. Because it's really important, because if you look out there and you type in Insta artist or Instagram artist, there are people out there with skills that put mine to shame. But I feel like as long as I am working harder, I'll always be okay. And that's kind of the shift I had to make. And that's why I'm glad I knew more about business than I did art, because I think if I was better at art, I would have just assumed all of this would happen without as much work. Like,
right.
I just price something for $100,000, wait for it to sell, and I'd be good. Instead of like I'm pricing this low and I'm going to hustle my face off and I'm going to make as many things as I can. And yeah, it's worked for me so far. But yeah, you cannot take the hard work out of it and just hope talent alone is gonna get you by. And I think that's true in sports too.
I was gonna say,
no
I'm looking
longer
at that. I'm like, I could clip that right there. That's like a pull quote,
yeah.
right? But it's definitely the truth. Speaking
It
for
is.
a little bit of like the content for like Forbes, can you take us a little bit through, like, without exposing all the numbers, but like maybe
Sure.
the growth that you've had over the last 4 years? For, let's say, like year one was whatever, 30,000, and then now it's went up exponentially. But like maybe talk a little bit about how you've been able to build up financially, and then what challenges that you've had with that, because everyone, like said, thinks
Sure.
like, oh, that 100,000 piece is going to come right off the top.
Yeah, no, it's not. I could just tell you that right off the bat, it's not, unless you know the right people that happen to just be like, yeah, here's $100,000, but I've not met them. No, I used to, I remember I was thinking about this the other day, like a wood original, I would probably be stoked if I got $100 for.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that's changed now is I'm pushing, and that would be, I'd be happy if I sold it eventually. And now it's kind of, I've learned a little bit more about, the demand of collectors wanting to be the one that gets the one of one, or they want a numbered print, or kind of tapping into that hobby world that's becoming a big deal again. And so using that and making one-of-one originals on wood, I've started kind of trying to build up some momentum with that. So setting a release date, putting a countdown on Instagram and on Facebook, and building kind of this excitement where other people's competitive nature can kind of come out. Because people that like sports generally are competitive. Mm-hmm. So allowing them to kind of tap into their competitive needs and their hope that they're going to, buy the one-of-one art piece of someone that maybe one day is going to be big enough where them owning the one-of-one is going to be their retirement. I mean, isn't that what everyone thinks when they collect baseball cards?
Sure,
too? Is like, they're going to land the card.
Which
that's going to be worth.
Which I'm concerned about right now with the way things are going, but that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah, I hope this is not the 90s all over again, but I got burned. I collected so many cards like when I was 12, and I was like, I'm going to so retire by the time I'm in high school with some of these, and they're worth like 10 cents.
Sure.
Kind of that, and then having the confidence to start pushing my price up, mm-hmm. but also to keep in mind that there's also a market for affordable art as well. Like I think there's two different, I've never fit into kind of the antique view of art where like it's oil and it's all through my imagination and it's on, canvas and it's in a gallery and it's going to sell for, X amount of dollars. That's never been me. It's kind of more, I made something cool. This is the price. And what I've seen over the years is that price has grown a lot more. The more that my name gets out there, the more that they see. My business model was I want to have a player own the original. So for a long time, I was working my 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and then on the weekends I'd travel to a stadium and I'd give an art piece away for free to a player. So say James Paxton was one of my first, gave him the art and then sold prints of that original. So people had an opportunity to own one of 100 prints that their favorite player owns the original of. And it was kind of this model that I came up with and I decided to try and use, and that has allowed kind of my business to grow from being, okay, I'm going to sell a print for $20 here and there and I'll be pretty excited if I sell 5 of them, mm-hmm. to, okay, I'm selling out of print runs. Maybe it's time to expand my prints to 500 prints or 1,000 prints or, things like that. So just in the last couple of years, the change has been amazing. And if I can keep that change going, I think this is going to grow to something bigger than I can handle on my own, which is always the hope that I can just focus more on art and I can have people helping with the other stuff. So, so far the model's working, but it's always about pivoting and shifting. And with COVID, it became less about prints of current players and more about older players, one-of-ones of Sandy Koufax and Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, because people weren't thinking about current players because we didn't know if we were going to have a season.
Sure.
So it's kind of constantly looking at the trends. And also, if Ken Griffey Jr.'s documentary is dropping on this date, I better have an original Ken Griffey Jr. to be ready the next morning as a one-of-one, and I can push my price. That's the opportunity to then push my price up higher.
Yes,
because everybody's in a buzz. Yeah, everybody's in a frenzy about Ken Griffey Jr. or Michael Jordan or, soon the Mets documentary. So it's kind of paying attention to those things that are coming up, and using it as a platform and a springboard to kind of see the next level of the pricing.
Yes, and as it grows, like you said, you can push the price up as opposed to the beginning. You were happy when like a few sold, and now, the price is up. When did you know that you could turn this to full time? Right, at some point for entrepreneurs, they say, all right, the money is close enough where I can make the leap and not fall in the water.
Yeah. So for me, there was 2 parts. One was building a pretty solid savings after working a great career here for 8 years. And the other part was PGA Tour hired me to do a piece for the winner of the FedEx Cup. And what's the other one that was ending at that time? Justin Rose and Tiger Woods were the winners. Sorry, I can't think of the other tournament name. But so I had 48 hours to make these 2 pieces, and I created them, and they loved them. But the cool thing was they asked if they could use them to market the PGA Tour, and I said yes, and there was a price for that. And It was going to be in USA Today, which I was excited about. Figured it'd be like a little picture, and they're like, pick up a newspaper tomorrow morning and check it out. So I go get the newspaper here in Canada, which is a little harder to find, and I open it, and there's a video on my Instagram of this where I'm like, live video for the first time, finding him, flipping through it. I have no idea that the whole back spread is my art,
Wow.
and because I can't see it yet. And I think that was the moment that I was like, you know what? Maybe this is my sign. Like, I'm going to go for it. And I've got some money to fall back on if this fails off the bat. And I just trusted my own work ethic and my own competitive nature that I will not fail. I will find a way to figure it out. And I talked to my parents, who happened to be like very like, I knew they were going to tell me if I was being an idiot, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's like, I think you should go for it. And I wrote my resignation and my 1 month notice the next day. And it was the scariest day of my life, I think. It was absolutely terrifying. But I'm so glad I did it, because, yeah, then you know you're free falling and it's up to you. Like, failures land on you, but so do all the success. So it just became a matter of how am I going to make this work? And I'm glad that I had some, a nest egg kind of set up, because there were a lot of unexpected expenses like Getty and, royalties and all that stuff. And, I always tell people, be ready for some of those unexpected costs and don't go into it with like a $0 in your bank account type thing. But it's worked out, and I'm so glad. But yeah, that USA Today full page spread is framed in my office, and that was the moment I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this. And
what year was this?
This was would have been the summer of 2017.
Wow. So in 3 years, you really had, like you said, this I don't want to say meteoric, but you've had a very nice, like, linear, way up. But what people aren't seeing underneath it are all the, peaks and valleys that go to eventually, start to make that move. Lauren, there's a fundraiser going on right now, hashtag for Lauren's Noggin. You suffered a very severe injury playing softball, where you said, you took a line drive right to the face and suffered a traumatic brain injury, which you at the time was, misdiagnosed. And this has been an ongoing thing that you've been treating for, I think, the last 4 years. So, in the short way, take us through, like, having experienced that, because, like, I'm a high school coach, and the last few years there's been a lot more focus on, like, recognizing concussions and return to play protocols and all those things, where, like, when I first started, all that stuff was not part of, like, the regulations or being certified. And, I'm sure I missed a few concussions early on when I was coaching soccer, to now the point where, like, we're really, overprotective of our athletes, which we should be, because, this isn't like a thing, oh, just shake it off, you'll be all right the next day.
Exactly. It's not a bruise that's going to heal tomorrow, and, the short version of this is I was grossly misdiagnosed. I went to the emergency room, and at this point, I'd lost consciousness. I was on a backboard. They weren't sure if there was some concern of my neck being damaged from the fall, and my eyes had completely swollen shut at that point. It was pretty ugly, but I was also dismissed 2 hours later, told I had no fractures and that I was fine. At the time, my boyfriend was actually a Muay Thai fighter, so he knew a little bit about concussions, and he was like, well, what are we doing here? Like, should I be waking her up every hour? And they're like, no, she's fine. And I didn't know enough to, like, advocate for myself either. Plus, I was kind of out of it. So I went home and I had to go see an ophthalmologist, because my vision, once my eyes started to open, I couldn't see very well out of it. And I went to see an ophthalmologist who did an MRI and found several fractures in my face, including my jaw, which I just had my 6th surgery last week. For that, having a fractured maxilla led to a lot of issues where I didn't realize my jawbone was actually receding, which has impacted my teeth. And there's just been so much stuff, but the biggest piece has been the lack of care I took, because I had no idea that I had such a severe concussion, have drawn out this recovery so much longer than it needed to be. And I think, my biggest hope with kind of talking about this and explaining the glaring errors that were made in that hospital that night is not so much to rip on the hospital, but to let people know you have to sometimes be your biggest advocate. And the more that we learn about concussions, if you have a concern that something's not right, sometimes you have to be the one to advocate for that. And for parents of kids that play sports and friends of people that play sports to just kind of be aware of the fact that we know so very little about concussions still, I fear. I'd go to a doctor and they'd say, stay in a dark room. And I go to a different doctor and they'd say, push it till you feel sick and then stop. And, there's so many different opinions that the path to getting healthy from this has been brutal. And the things that I've done wrong because I didn't know any better, like get on an airplane 3 weeks later, or, go back to playing sports in 2 weeks once my eyes open back
Really?
up. Like so
That's
many
incredible. Like, I would,
no,
like,
it's stupid. It was so
but I mean, it's
stupid.
incredible in the sense of like to hear it, because from what I know, I'm like, wow, like I wouldn't expect to see it. But like you said, you weren't like informed
You
in a
trust
sense.
the doctors.
Yeah.
And when they say you're fine, you kind of don't want to be that person that's like, no, but am I? And also I think you might relate as an athlete too, that you're so used to just rubbing dirt on it, and there's kind of a value placed on someone that just toughs things out. And that was very strong for me. Like I felt like the more that I could tough out injuries, and still to this day, the more valuable I was and the more heart I must have if I can play through an injury. And, with a head injury, I learned that is
You can't
the
really
wrong
play through
mindset.
that.
It's the worst thing you can do. And, I wish I'd seen somebody who was a little bit more educated with head trauma. And I think it's so important that even emergency rooms without a neurological specialist or even, I don't know, any sort of specialist in the area, when they're not present, that there's a certain protocol that is gone through every time there's a head injury, because leaving that night could have been a lot worse than it was. And it already has been, a nightmare of 6 different surgeries now. And a lot of time that I'm never going to get back from that. And it's been a long road, and I'm curious to see where we are in another 5 years with it. I think we still have a lot to learn about concussions, and it's one injury that it's not better to just rub dirt on it and keep going. It is not better to do that.
And that's something I've learned, as a coach. I had a player get concussion about 2 years ago. He was playing goal and came out, slid out for the ball. Kid slid feet first into him, hit him.
No.
I took him right out. His dad's like a doctor, but not whatever. He was a doctor of a different specialty. He's like, he'll be okay. I'm like, he's not really okay. I'm like, and then he wound, he had a concussion enough where like he couldn't return to sports until the next 6 months. And, but initially he was like, oh, it's going to be okay. And I'm like, I've seen this before. And I'm not a doctor, but, take a little more precaution, because you have to err on that side. Do you think any of this is tied into like the whole insurance system? I know you're up in Canada, and, for America here, we're like, oh, Canada has such a good system, people aren't paying and everyone can get covered. Do you think any of that was attributed to like doctors are trying to like moderate how much testing that they're giving out on patients?
I don't think that thoughts come to mind as much as I think there was, I'm sometimes my own worst enemy when I try and be tougher than I need to. And I think kind of my nonchalant attitude and lack of like, I'm miserable, just kind of being like, it's fine. I think a little bit of that played into the other issue, which is that without a specialist on site, you're left with just an ER doctor. And I try and remember that doctors are humans too. And if you think about all the different medical things they have to know, like that's a lot. And it's possible that without a protocol, The swelling in my head was so severe that an x-ray made it hard to see fractures,
Mm-hmm.
where, the right thing to do would have been to keep me and have me have an MRI. And I don't feel angry at the system per se. I'm disappointed that there's not a protocol for a head injury, given how much we know it can impact a human's life for years and years afterwards, and how severe it can be if misdiagnosed or something's missed or there's a brain bleed. So, I've had surgeries in the States and in Canada. I'm actually a U.S. citizen, and I don't have a lot of comments on what's better. I think there's positives for both, and I don't think about the insurance aspect of things, but I do think about the one issue that has hindered me from getting the help I needed for so long is the referral system here, and that you need a referral to take the next step. And that ER doctor, by assuming I was fine and also giving me a diagnosis of no fractures and no concussion, set me back a long ways because I never got that referral. So then once I started advocating to get some further help, the referrals were so far behind that by the time I got to the concussion clinic and finally got my referral to go there, it had been past 6 months, and they said they don't take people that have had a head injury older than 6 months. So I was behind the 8 ball the whole time, and that's been the issue for this whole thing. Is then the craniofacial surgeon that should have looked at my maxilla fracture was no longer an option because it wasn't a referral. So that's why I've had to go privately and get this done and pay out of pocket. So it's the referral system that ended up being an issue for me here in Canada, that I lack the knowledge from being from the States to really understand the impact of not getting that referral that night, or I probably would have fought for it before I left, because the waiting lists here are years. The craniofacial surgeon in one of the hospitals is over 3-year wait list. So once you don't get that emergency referral, you just go to the back. You go to your family care doctor, and then you're at the back of the line with everyone else. So with something like a head injury, it's kind of a bad deal to be at the back of the line.
Yes, and that's an understatement. And it's but for you to, I don't know if recover is the right word, but here we are talking, and you're able to get through all your art.
Yep.
What challenges that presented for you? Because to be able to focus and concentrate on a screen on, small detail, after having that kind of injury, how have you had to adjust? Because I'm sure you hit spells where like, I got to shut the screen thing off because it just hurts to focus.
Yeah, and I've had, special glasses, made by, I've started working with a concussion specialist that works a lot with the NHL players just this past year, actually past 6 months. And he's been pretty great in helping me kind of with little tools like certain glasses that kind of help a little bit, and learning that my peripheral vision had kind of shut down, and working on getting that to kind of function again. The headaches suck, and I get nauseous looking at a screen for too long, but I've started to know some of the signs when that's coming. And if I can kind of get some ice on my head and shut my eyes for a little bit, I can get back to it later that night. Whereas if I just push through it, eventually my body gives me no choice but to shut it down, because I'm either going to vomit or my head hurts so bad that I can't focus. So it's been a learning curve, and I do think it gets better. I've got all these different exercises I do with my vision, as well as this kind of strange one where there's tape on the inside of my glasses, and the idea is it kind of disrupts your vision enough that it makes your peripheral vision start to pay attention, because that very center, right where you would focus right in the middle, is kind of disturbed. Mm-hmm. And little things like that have started to make a difference. So yeah, I'm learning a lot. This is the first time in my life, the last 3 years, where I truly understand people that say they have migraines and they're shut down. I'm always like, oh, how bad is it? Oh, I get it now. I fully understand. You will never hear me ever tell someone that says they have a migraine that it can't be that bad, ever.
Right.
It's not fun, but
you can imagine like 20-year-old self in competitive mode being like, whatever, take some ibuprofen and suck it up, right? And now you realize like, maybe they are struggling.
I say all the time that this might be some roundabout sick karma, because I really did think for the majority of my athletic life that concussions were a mindset. And I hate admitting that, because it was so naive and so stupid to think that. And
But what did we
now that I've
know
had a
back then?
concussion, you know, and yeah, we didn't. But I also just was always just assumed it's no different than when you know, you get a little, you know, your back's a little sore, maybe
Hmm.
your quad's a little tight. Like, come
Right.
on,
You
let's
just
go,
gotta,
stretch it
yeah.
out, let's go. Yeah, you don't just stretch out your noggin or like put a little ice on it and call it a day. And that's been frustrating for me. And the hardest part of it with that was the depression that came with it. Like, you know, all the mental health, the anxiety and the depression that suddenly came out of, you know, the depression mostly. I've had anxiety most of my life, but the depression that came out of nowhere was debilitating at times. Like, not only was I suddenly not able to function and do the things I want to do, but there's also a lot of research on the way concussions impact mental health and how they do exacerbate depression and anxiety. And that was honestly harder than some of the physical symptoms for me. Just trying to be patient and trust that it'll get better.
Right. And again, that's not another thing where you could just tell people, to get over it because it's real. And as you said, it's debilitating and crippling. And, it's really tough being inside and just not wanting to get out of
Yeah.
bed or not wanting to talk to anybody or just feel like everything's going to collapse. For those that have been there, it's a really difficult struggle and one that doesn't, stop with a snap of the fingers.
No, and it's given me such a bigger mission to this whole art thing. And, a lot of you'll kind of see on my social media that it's like MLB, NLBPA, and Hall of Fame artist, mental health advocate. Like, that is the most important title. And being able to speak about it as much as I can, as often as I can, has been the most rewarding, because the few people that I heard talk about it and say, listen, like, I'm having a really hard time. I had a concussion and now I'm suddenly dealing with depression that is just so crippling that I'm worried I won't make it 2 years. Hearing other people's vulnerability around that saved me, because I didn't feel like I was so alone with it all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can give that back to anyone, it would be far more success to me than any art piece, any business success, anything. Like, it's such a relief when you suddenly realize that you're not in the journey alone, and there's other people to talk to, and that there's groups, and that there's research, and that, it does get better, and there's things you can do, and it's a slow journey. I needed to be told that it's a slow journey, because I like to do everything fast. I want it fixed tomorrow. I want the thing tomorrow. I want, I want everything now, and I want everything to be better now. And, finally learning that is not going to happen in this situation was really important for my own health and my own kind of willingness to keep fighting this.
Yeah, and that move to go on is so important. When we were talking, I was thinking about the topic of perfectionism, and you coming from like a highly competitive athletic background, and I teach
Yep.
students that really struggle with this, concept. Is that something also that you've had to manage? Because you had said earlier that like you'll look at your pieces and not be 100% satisfied, or there's something I can tweak. And, I know that's part of it, that like sometimes stuff just has to be good enough. And what I mean by that is you have to let it rest at some point. Is that something else that you've had to manage, with your artwork and all these other kind of related issues that you've spoken about today?
Yeah, the first time I really saw it I really was kind of told to pay attention was actually last month, August. I had my sore surgery on my jaw and gums and teeth, and was having my fifth and sixth in the very last day of August, and then just last week. And I was just burnt out, and I was finding I didn't have the energy to do things. And it was some advice from actually a businessman here that I know that I really respect. He's built an incredible business, several of them. And he said to me, like, without you, the business doesn't survive. You can't pass on the art to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing that was important to me. Like, this business doesn't happen. I can't just pass it on if I burn out. And I love what I do. For the first time in my life, I really understand what it means to not work a day in your life when you love what you do. I always thought that was such bullshit. I was like, whatever. Like, they're not
Right,
working
dudes
hard
are
enough.
still working. Yeah.
Yeah, come on. You're not working hard enough if you think that. But now I really get it. And I never want to get to the point where I'm burnt out here. And last month, I decided, you know what? It's okay if I don't beat any numbers or any records or I don't do anything crazy this month. I need to just be. And I kind of let things just be. I let their online store just sell what it was going to sell. And you know, I didn't make a lot of new pieces, and it was okay. And I think the kind of the energy that gave me to just give myself a break for that month has been reassuring in a lot of ways. One, that things will still be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And two, that I needed that in order to get through the next year. Whereas if I had pushed through that just for the sake of trying to, you know, prove I could, you know, it may have a bigger impact in a negative way down the road than just giving myself a few weeks to just be a human that's a little bit injured right now, you know? So I'm learning, and a lot of those things come from people I really respect saying, hey, you're going to regret pushing it now because it will catch up to you and you
Right.
will burn out.
You know, it's not like
And
the
it's hard
season's
to
going
get
to
out
be
of
over
burnout.
tomorrow. Right? So, like,
Yeah,
yeah, you know, let's push because we got a week and then it's playoffs and then you have, whatever, 6
exactly.
months before you play again.
Yeah,
Like, you got to wake up
yeah,
to see another day. Right.
absolutely. And, you know, and trusting that I would come back better if I gave myself a break was something I had to I had to just trust that was true. And it was, and it worked out. And, but yeah, that's been a learning curve. Like, I'm not better. I'm not more worthy just if I never stop working. Like, I think that's been hard as an athlete and as a person that's kind of a perfectionist. You know, I sometimes think my worth is drawn from how hard I'm working. And, you know, to some extent, that is how my business has been successful. It is how I've gotten where I'm at. But it also could be the biggest hindrance if I never learn how to pump the brakes on that at important times. So kind of trying to find that balance is probably going to be a struggle for me for as long as I live. But at least I'm starting to understand the value in not going 100 miles an hour all the time.
Understood. And, you know, that's, I think, an important lesson to relay. With the season winding down, are there any special projects that you have coming up that you want to, you know, talk about or kind of give a preview to? Like, hey, I'm working on this for the playoffs or for the World Series potentially.
Yeah, right now, any day now, I'm going to be launching 9 new prints. Let's see, 6 of them will be Cooperstown Hall of Fame prints, and 3, assuming there's no hiccups with any of them, and 3 will be current players. Always love releasing new prints because it kind of opens up my art to people that can't afford originals, which, hey, I totally understand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just nice having prints, as well as the playoffs are a fun time for me. I spend a lot of time watching baseball and just waiting for that moment that I then want to kind of pull an all-nighter to start an art piece on and get out there. I love playoffs because I get to do kind of real-time. It's exciting. Like there's going to be a lot of art being produced and made from, you know, the time playoffs start. And I think it's kind of a unique playoff anyway. So lots of opportunity. But yeah, the next thing up will be 9 new prints releasing any day now. So keep an eye out for that. There'll be a pre-sale event, and yeah, always excited to share new prints with people. So
Great. And where can people find that? I realized like we went this whole time like I haven't plugged the sites or the social media.
That's okay.
So where can people find your artwork?
Yeah, LaurenTaylorIllustrations.com is my website. Lauren Taylor Illustrations is my Instagram and Facebook, and then LT Illustrations is my Twitter. I try and be pretty active on there, and that's where I post brand new originals, and also where I will announce print releases and whatnot. All my prints are numbered and limited, so kind of, I announce them. There's an opportunity to get some, and then once they retire, they permanently retire.
Well, I think the listeners are going to appreciate your artwork and your story. Lauren, thank you very much for joining us today and
Thank
spending
you.
time with us on the podcast.